I am terribly introverted. I've got good news for people who feel that they're shy. I've got good news for people who feel that they are introverted. You're stronger. In this case, beta beats alpha because people care more and they engage with you.
Beta beats alpha.
An introvert is much more likely to ask about somebody else. How are you? What are you doing? How do you feel? And that way you build a proper mutually trusting alliance or friendship or relationship. The world of social media has pulled a really unpleasant trick on us. It's made people believe that there is value in a number. You know, I have
so many
X thousand followers. So what?
Right.
Being popular, I'm sorry to say, is just a waste of time.
Right. And it takes a lot of energy, to be honest.
It takes a lot of energy. But being a good friend, a good ally, and somebody who is understands that alliances are two-way streets, that's valuable.
Where is home for you, Julian?
I think home for me is humanity. Home is wherever you are with people who care and where you can form meaningful alliances and relationships.
Julian Fisher, welcome to our podcast. It's lovely to have you here. Now, we first met in Henley-on-Thames. It was a sultry afternoon, a bit like today, and we were discussing your new book. You are an author, a consultant, and also a specialist in intelligence and investigation. Welcome, and let's have a conversation because I'm very excited to know all about you. And most importantly, tell us from the start, because you were born in one of Britain's poorest postcodes. What do you remember about growing up in that area of Birmingham and how it has shaped you today?
Well, Catherine, thank you first for inviting me here. It feels like such a huge privilege to be on the Islam Channel. It's
our honour. And, you know, to have this conversation is, you know, I've been looking forward to this for some time.
And me too. And you're right, it's another beautiful sultry day outside. I can't think of a better day to spend sat in a studio.
Absolutely.
But of all the studios I could choose, this is the one.
Absolutely. We've done all our Morris dancing, and I think it's now time to start talking about you and your experience and your life.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. You mentioned my upbringing in a very deprived part of Birmingham. Well, defined as a deprived part of Birmingham. It was described by the Guardian newspaper as the poorest postcode in the UK back then. And I have to admit that I was born in 1970, so things have changed a great deal since. And you asked me what I remember about my upbringing, about that area. And I'll start with what was beyond our front door, if I may. Because what was amazing about being brought up in B16 in Birmingham all those years ago was the sheer diversity of the neighbourhood. Like so many more deprived areas, it was somewhere that communities of immigrants...
and when you say diversity, what sort of different cultural backgrounds were there? Your neighbours, where were they from?
They were from all over. There were Irish immigrants. There were immigrants from Uganda who had been fleeing the Idi Amin regime. Later on, there were plenty from the Windrush generation. There were people from Bangladesh. Later on, a much stronger Muslim community indeed emerged in that area. And we've had huge numbers of Polish and other Eastern Europeans moving into the area too. So a real mix. Mm-hmm. And I was very fortunate as a child because we had the playing fields right next door to our house.
Which you don't imagine in the middle of Birmingham. People think that it is just rows of houses and in the past a lot of factories. We do have parks.
Sadly, those particular playing fields are now rows of houses. They used to belong to the Mitchells and Butlers brewery, and there's quite an odd story here because from where we lived, if I looked out of the top floor window, you could see the Mitchells and Butlers brewery at the end of the road in front of us. But you weren't allowed to drink beer in the estate where I was brought up. It was called the Gillett Estate, and it was a Quaker estate.
A Quaker estate, absolutely. And they have quite a few of these in Birmingham where alcohol was banned at the time.
Right. So on brewing days, we could smell beer, but we couldn't drink it. And one of the very interesting developments in that area over the past 55 years is, whereas when I looked out of that top floor window, I saw a brewery, anybody looking out of the same top floor window today would see a mosque.
SubhanAllah. That is a huge change, isn't it?
It's a huge change.
I mean, it's not just a little bit of, some more diverse background coming in. That's a huge change. It is one building completely being turned into a mosque. As we know, that does happen in a lot of our cities now. But this clearly, for myself being Muslim, and for anybody who doesn't drink alcohol, that's a good change.
Yeah, absolutely. And what better encapsulation of societal development in Britain?
Yes.
And I do think it's amazing because one of the early lessons that I learned from being brought up in such a culturally diverse area, and as I say, these fields were there. They were meant to be the playing fields for the employees of the Mitchells and Butlers Brewery, but they turned into the de facto playground for the local truants, of which I was often one. So
no, I can't believe that.
I spent probably more time out of school than in school, and in actual fact.
Did it shape you, though? I mean, was that freedom that you had? Is that something you've taken with you into your adulthood?
I think so. I must add also that for reasons I won't go into right now, my parents elected not to have any of us educated until the age of 11 at school. Yeah, we were educated at home.
So it's very brave of your parents,
very well educated. It must be said, because my parents are both well read. And
so they understood the value of
thoughtful.
Education, which obviously you picked up. And perhaps by not going to school, you understood your own research and how to,
I think that's
educate
true.
yourself to a certain extent as well.
I think that's true, Catherine. But actually, probably the most important thing was it taught me to engage with people from different cultures, because, as I say, I spent a lot of time on these playing fields, playing with people from very different parts of the world, very different backgrounds. And that taught me, I hope, to be much more open-minded, much more accepting of different cultures. And perhaps that's why I was drawn in later life to a career which involved me travelling abroad and dealing with different cultures.
That's Birmingham, though. A lot of people do have that experience, that because of that diversity, they have learnt so much about other people's backgrounds that it has shaped their future. And for you especially, there was a transformative moment as you grew up. And unfortunately, you were in hospital for a time.
Yes.
And there was a lady from a completely different background who was a student nurse there, an Iranian refugee. Tell us a little bit about how that transformed your life at that point.
Sure. Can I take you back a couple of steps before we get on to that? Because I've talked a little bit about what was beyond our doors in that rather drafty, rather cold house in B16 Birmingham. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what was within the house. As I say, I was brought up, very lucky to be brought up by two exceptionally clever, thoughtful, open-minded parents. And they surrounded us with books. My father was a piano player, so we were all taught to play the piano from an early age, although I confess I'm not very good.
It's a very cultural upbringing.
It was a very cultural upbringing, but it was a very materially disadvantaged upbringing. We were not wealthy, and there were 7 of us, 7 children. And
to a certain extent, wisdom is wealth. So
I
you
agree
had a
with
different
that.
sort of wealth.
I agree with that. And health is wealth, isn't it? There's the Swahili saying, "Hali ni mali," health is wealth. Yeah. And we were brought up to be active and healthy, and in many cases brought up to be questioning and open-minded and mentally active. However, that does bring me to one very sad element of the story, which is that my sister, the only sister I had, she was the firstborn of 7, as I say. The first of our family on either side to go to university. She was accepted to the University of Birmingham, but unfortunately fell ill, initially with a physical illness and glandular fever. But that over time led to complications which sadly resulted in her suffering from depression, and later she was diagnosed with a mental condition called paranoid schizophrenia. And she was hospitalised in Birmingham at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And very sadly, she took her own life while she was there.
I'm sorry to hear that. That must have been extremely traumatic for you and the family at the time.
Indeed. I mean, impossible to explain what a gap such a loss leaves for an entire family. And it so happened that it happened on my very first day at school. It was the first day that I'd gone to attend secondary school. And I'd been very, very excited about that. I was looking forward to learning, and I was looking forward to making new friends. I was looking forward to the opportunities all of that would bring. But, of course, the loss of my sister in those circumstances had a profound impact on my relationship with school, and it changed overnight. So you said you found it difficult to believe that I was a truant. I became a truant because sometimes young children are not entirely kind to one another, let's be honest, and I was bullied quite badly.
And I think perhaps if you've gone through trauma as well, you're obviously not going to be the same when you do go to school, and the teachers seem to not know how to react.
They had no idea. They had no idea. I think it's probably changed now, but we're talking the early 1980s. And I don't think teachers were trained to deal with trauma amongst their students in a way that they probably are now.
Did you hide your feelings?
I hid myself, hid my feelings, I hid away from the world. Which
meant then you perhaps weren't interacting with the other school children.
So having had that wonderful immediate upbringing of being very open and having these amazing friends from all over the world, just literally on the playing fields next door to me, I suddenly found myself very withdrawn, very lonely, and ultimately unable to face being in school. And about a year after my sister's death, I was waiting to cross the road when I conceived of a brilliant idea to avoid having to go to school, and I walked in front of a moving vehicle. Now, I can't say that I intended to take my life. I was 12. I'm not sure really what I intended, other than I didn't want to go to school that day. And so it proved. I wasn't to go back to school for some time after that, because I suffered a very serious injury. Thankfully, having been thrown onto the other side of the road, there was no other traffic coming towards me, because had there been, we wouldn't be having this conversation today.
Absolutely.
But the upshot of it was that I spent nearly a year in hospital with a complex fracture, and a lot of it immobilised in a plaster cast from chest to toe. And that sounds like it was an awful trauma, but in actual fact, it was a transformative experience for me. And it was a transformative experience because of who I met, and you've mentioned her, Maya.
Even just, as you said, it's a transformative event, because I guess when you're in hospital as well, you have that time to think, what actually happened?
What do I want?
How am I going to recover from this? And perhaps in some of the process, you then learn more about yourself.
Absolutely.
And also, therefore, the people that you're going to meet in the hospital are going to have a different impact on you that they perhaps would have had before.
The phrase in loco parentis applies here, in place of parents, because my nursing staff, less so the doctors, who tend to be a bit more remote, but my nursing staff in many ways were there for me as parental figures.
Yes, and perhaps, as you said, the children at school you couldn't relate to.
That's right.
And all of a sudden there was a nurse.
Suddenly there were kind, loving people who were concerned not just for my physical well-being, but also for my mental well-being. And there's a point when you do have that year of being stuck in a hospital bed that I think is very important for what I want to talk about today, which is it gives you time to connect with your values, to connect with who you want to be, the person that you feel is the best version of yourself. And I was very fortunate in that process to meet a young nurse called Maya. Maya was not very much older than I was, to be honest. She was barely, I talk about in loco parentis, this was probably more replacing my sister, if I'm honest. We grew very close, and she had an extraordinary story that she was a recent refugee from Iran, which in 1979 had gone through the revolution. And she'd lost her father, who was a doctor. And Maya had one big ambition, which was to honour her father's memory by becoming a medical professional. So she wanted to train to become a nurse. And she wound up with her mother living essentially in a bedsit not very far away from my parental home in Birmingham. And she had a major problem in that she didn't really speak adequate English to take her examinations. And of course, again, times are different now, but back then, I think schools struggled.
As an investigator and intelligence consultant, sort of in the future, you were going to meet a lot of people from these backgrounds. But obviously, at this point in your time, your career as an intelligence wasn't even a thought. This was just shaping you.
It wasn't was nowhere near on the cards. It would never have occurred to me to think about pursuing any career in that sort of field. My understanding of spying is the same as everybody's understanding, most people's understanding, formed by the Bond movies that we would go as a family to see at the cinema down the road.
But here you were,
but here I was being shaped by some forces that I didn't even realise were shaping me, by some influences that I didn't even realise were shaping me, including this young woman who, having failed her examinations first time round because of an inadequate grasp of English, which is perfectly understandable, determined that she was going to improve her English and managed to, working with a teacher who proved to be an ally, got in touch with the universities which taught Farsi. And through that, she got to know a young man called Dan who was learning Farsi at university. And the two of them they spent a summer together, 2 hours each day, 1 hour speaking English, 1 hour speaking Farsi. And I've got the timing slightly wrong because she was doing that before she first took her examinations. And she got to the point when she was able to take what we used to call O-levels, now GCSEs, I think, but she failed them.
It's definitely GCSEs
It's definitely GCSEs.
Yeah.
But she failed them. And this was where she felt at that point she despaired and felt that she was going to have to go and, as her mother did, earn a living as a cleaner. But Dan's father stepped in and he said, well, look, he was quite a wealthy industrialist, worked in the jeweller's quarter in Birmingham. And he said,
thriving area of Birmingham,
is thriving.
even now.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's where you go if you want a lovely piece of jewellery.
The place to get your wedding bands and wedding
absolutely, it's the jewellery
ring,
quarter
definitely.
in Birmingham.
So he was a very kind man, and he decided that he was going to support Maya and her mother financially while she studied for her retakes. And the second time round, she passed her examinations and was then able to go on to win a place to train to be a nurse, or what they called state-enrolled nurse in those days. And I met her in the first year of that training. And she said to me, she used to call me Kuchulu, which is, I believe, Farsi for little one or young one.
So your exposure to another language, Farsi,
straight away
as well.
And exposure to, more importantly, exposure to a resilience of mind, an attitude.
Because you said she was quite young.
She was, I mean, she can't have been older than 18 or 19, I suppose. When I think through the timings of her having, when she failed the exams and then retook them and then coming on, I don't think she would have been older than 19.
So all this time you were...
But for a 19-year-old, this extraordinary presence of mind, this extraordinary ability to see what was needed. And she said to me, always remember, Kuchulu, one thing, and that is that the most important thing in life is allies. Never forget that. And I never have. And that was what I took away from hospital.
And allies meaning close contacts, people you can rely on.
Yes.
So how do you differentiate between friends and allies in your view?
I don't think you need to, I mean, when we have allies throughout our lives. So I've had allies who are teachers. I've had my wife is my biggest ally. My father is my ally. Mm-hmm. I'm allies to my brothers. I hope I'm allies to people who work with me and have worked with me or for me over the years. I think leadership is about allyship as it happens, but that's perhaps a different subject for a different day. I don't think we need to differentiate because the key point is...
Meaning friends can't be allies, or...
No, friends can be allies.
Friends can be allies.
The important thing is that there's trust in those relationships. Mm-hmm. And an example of allyship can be as simple as if you are going through a difficult time. I'll give you a direct example from my experience in the past week. My brother has very sadly been in intensive care in Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham, where he is, by the way, receiving the most astonishing care. My thanks goes out to his medical team. It's amazing.
That's good to know that he's getting that care at the moment.
And he is recovering. But there were dark days last week, and a very good friend of mine from college was very incredibly supportive, was phoning me to ask about how I was coping. Now, that was the last thing on my mind. I was wanting to support my family. I was wanting to support my brother. But David acted as an ally, not just as a friend, by which I mean he was giving me support in a meaningful, practical way. And so there isn't a distinction in my mind between friendship, but actually being present,
yes, useful advice,
and open and supportive.
Right.
And I think that's as much allyship coming from a friend as allyship I have from the teacher who persuaded me many years after the accident that I had what it took to take entrance examinations for Oxford University, where my headmaster didn't believe I had and was determined not to let me do it.
I mean, this is fascinating that even at that age, that you were so young at the time, you were thinking that, I need allies in my life.
Because Maya told me.
Yes, because of her.
Yeah.
Because she said so. And but it's the fact that you also remember that incident and that you took it on board. So, I mean, I'm a firm believer in that sort of we are given help throughout our lives every day, but we don't often see it.
Yes.
We don't often notice. And the same as a Muslim, signs from Allah. Sometimes we know that there are signs from Allah to help us in life. Sometimes we just don't see them.
I couldn't agree more. And I think you come back to the example of my friend calling me at times when things were quite dark in the past week. And it was another friend said to me he'd noticed that the way that I was writing even short messages had become, he said, you're using a lot more religious terms now than you were. And I think you're forced to confront some quite deep questions when a loved one is in that situation.
And sometimes this is why tragedy hits us. It's to sort of force us into thinking about our life and where it's going. And also sometimes as you've recovered from your trauma, you didn't know at the time that you were going to recover. And it obviously did take time, but you did recover physically. You're here.
I did.
But sometimes the mental trauma does carry on more.
I make no bones about it. If I hadn't had that accident,
leads me to my next question, is that some people do struggle to recover. And I was just wondering how you did get from that place of pain to a place of purpose.
Well, I'm going to say something a little bit controversial. I don't think I ever have. I've come over time to learn to accept pain as being part of what being human is. And I can relate that back to one of the early questions about what did I get out of my upbringing in a difficult and deprived area.
And it's really a very different way of looking at life.
Yes.
A lot of people wouldn't want to look at life like that, but you're almost forced to change your view of life.
I think so. And I mean, I don't deny that I've had very, very many hours of therapy with some good therapists and some less good therapists. And
some were your allies?
Some were my allies. One in particular was my ally, and I credit him with a great deal in helping me to come to terms with the grief, which I think had remained within me since childhood and perhaps had been unresolved in my determination to present to the world in a particular way. And he taught me a valuable lesson of vulnerability as well. And that's an important part of it. So it's not about, I appreciate the way you're asking the question. How do you travel from one to another? How do you travel from pain to positivity? But I think you must carry the pain with you and embrace it as being part of what being human is.
So you're saying it's not necessarily from one to another, but it's more acceptance.
Yes.
And the way you're carrying it.
Yes.
You're not carrying it as a burden anymore. You're carrying it as a part of you and moving forward with it. Is that
that's exactly right.
It?
And I think, I mean, of course, without question, if I was able to reverse the tragic events in my life, and the loss of my sister was by no means the only one, of course I would. But I think the fact of them, A, can't be denied, B, has enabled me to think and to accept that quite a lot of what we do in the world is out of our hands, and that's quite an important acceptance.
Absolutely, yeah.
And C, I think has made me I hope, a better person when people around me that I care about, or even sometimes people I don't much care for, need help. I think it's made me a better ally.
Yeah. And with that as well, we often hear that those who are consultants in the world of intelligence do have a similar background in the sense of they've been through trauma.
Yeah.
Is this because they then see the world in a very different way? Are they more able to become a sort of an expert in their field of work in intelligence and investigation because they understand what other people have been through?
This is
from their own trauma.
It's a huge question to unpack.
It is maybe too big. Maybe we should narrow it down.
Let me start on the. I want to have a shot at it actually,
okay.
Catherine.
Let's do it.
Because I think it's a really important question. It is true that I've met people in different fields of intelligence now from different countries, very different personalities. But you're right. There does seem to be one thing which is common or prevalent. It's not universal, but it's prevalent, which is having had some experience of life that is challenging. And I think maybe it does two things. One is that it actually equips you to deal with some of the challenges that the world of intelligence will throw at you, because you're working often in challenging circumstances overseas, perhaps threatened on occasion. But also I think it makes you a more open and responsive human. It makes you more aware of your place in the mass of humanity. And if intelligence, if working as a spy, if you like, is about anything, it's about understanding interpersonal relationships. And pain has to be a part of that.
And does pain become endurance?
To a certain extent, I think.
Because you were also the lead trainer for a Channel 4 programme, Spies, which I actually watched. It was in 2017. It was fantastic.
Great, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Because, we always sort of think about, could I do a job? Would I be able to sort of be an investigator? Would I be able to sort of work in that area? And at the time I thought, okay, yeah, I'm a mumsy person, right? It's not me. But what I did see from the programme is that a lot of the contestants were put under pressure.
Yes.
As part of their training. So I remember one lady, she was kept up all night with questions.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, well, a lot of us as mothers, we are up all night with our children, sometimes crying. And we have to get up in the morning and take the older children to school. And it puts you under pressure. But you come out the other side a bigger, better person, stronger and more resilient. And I saw the lady in the programme was the same. She had gone through a sleepless night of not sleeping a wink and having all these questions thrown at her. And when she finished the training, she was elated. She was like, wow, I can do this. I have more strength.
Yeah. Well, that's right. I mean, so that series took 16 ordinary members of the public, and we made purposely, we were looking for people who wouldn't necessarily have thought about themselves in that context, thought about the possibility that they might have what it takes to be a spy, and we put them through several tests to see if they did. And what was extraordinary about it was, as you say, the resilience of those who took part, and their ability to find mental and emotional reserves in themselves that they just didn't know had been there.
Yes, and that was the message that I got from the programme, is that we can all learn these skills that you talk about in intelligence and put them into our everyday life to recover, to become stronger, to recover, or as you said, not even recover, but just to learn to live with parts of our past.
To learn to accept who you are, what's happened to you, where you are in the world today, and to learn to accept that the way to thrive doesn't come just from within. It also comes from relying on people around you. Obviously, what we were testing in that series, which I think it sadly isn't available any longer on Catch Up, but it's a shame because I think there's a great deal of learning points there, and the channel would be well advised to put it back on.
Learn more about ourselves from watching the programme. I'd like to say, I hope they bring it back, and I hope that you do another series of that because
or something similar.
Yes, something similar would be amazing.
I think because it goes right to the heart of what I want to say to everybody, which is that these skills that we at Spies use,
which I want to talk about more, by the way. So do tell us about the skills that that you would need to be a spy, that we can have in our everyday lives that are going to improve our lives, which is what your book does tell us. There are certain steps, there are certain skills. For example, you talk about laying the groundwork.
Yes.
And then the cultivation.
So let me start by by framing what we're talking about. It's that if you look at the world of international espionage between states, what does a spy do? A spy essentially travels overseas, often undercover, maybe to war-ravaged countries, places where they're not always going to be welcome, and they engage with other people, nationals of that country, often in positions of significant influence. They might be politicians, they might be bureaucrats, they might be officials, they might be military people, they might be senior business people, and the spy persuades them to become traitors. Now, that's very bluntly speaking. That puts it very, very starkly.
We all think, how is that
how on
even
earth is that possible?
And why would that help us in our work of in our world
Absolutely.
of business or our work life?
And we think two things. One is actually that's a horrible thing to be doing because
at first, I think that sounds so immoral.
It sounds immoral, and secondly, it sounds impossible. The reason I wanted to write Think Like a Spy is because I don't believe either of those things is true. I think it needn't be immoral, and it's certainly not impossible. And of course, as somebody who'd spent a lot of time thinking about personal values and integrity in hospital and beyond, when I started to consider the rights and wrongs, the morals, the ethics of the world of espionage, of course I was presented with some intellectual dilemmas. But I think they can be resolved, and they're resolved because of what I call the importance of shared humanity and shared adherence to values. And
a lot of these values you have mentioned in your book. I mean, I love the design of this because it's got the little spy holes there, you know. And yeah, it's part sort of memoir, part tutorial. You know, we're learning from this. You know, we're learning about ourselves. We're learning about how to, sort of work with people. I mean, nobody lives in a world where it's just totally themselves. We're never completely isolated. We have to work with people. We have to get on in our lives. And these steps are very useful for us and how we interact with people and move on. So carry on with those. I mean, those steps. So the groundwork, it makes, and as you said, it sounds, do I really want to, am I given another image of myself, or am I still being myself?
Am I true to myself?
Am I being true to myself?
Yeah. So
how does that work? How do these steps? So you're laying the groundwork, but if you're making friends with someone who you call allies,
goals allies is the phrase I use.
So these are slightly different from other allies. So goals allies. Where's the morality in this for you?
Okay, I'm a beneficiary of a period of an incredible period of Britain's history where social mobility was quite accelerated very rapidly. But I recognise there are many, many people still who don't benefit from that sort of radical social change. Particularly a lot of immigrants and a lot of people who come from more marginalised parts of society. And there's the one thing that I think makes the big difference to social mobility is what some people call social capital. Let's forget the lingo. Let's talk about what that really means. What that really means is that kids from deprived backgrounds, where perhaps they have parents who are scrambling to earn a living, perhaps find that they're marginalised for whatever reason, for their beliefs, for their lack of money, for their nationality even. Those kids are denied something very, very important, and that is people around them who can just teach them what to do, you know. So if you take the educational level, for instance, I was extremely fortunate to have a teacher who recognised that I had the intellectual ability to take what were then entrance examinations for Oxford. Other teachers just weren't interested in my declared intention to try for Oxford. They didn't think I had it in me, but he was prepared to be an ally. And he was prepared, and I had no idea how it worked. And back then, we didn't even have the internet. You know, I had no way of finding out how do you set about registering for taking these what they used to call fourth-term entrance exams. And I had to be guided through that process. And the teacher, Johnny, who taught me that process, took me through that process and helped me learn the way of thinking to approach those entrance examinations, was a goals ally. Now, of course, many teachers are naturally going to be goals allies, but even within that natural network of people you might find are on your side, some will be and others won't be. And the importance of that, I don't think there's any moral difficulty with finding people to support you as you go on a journey of social mobility. In fact, because for many people it already exists. You know, if you can turn to your parents' network, people who... Look, I mean,
well, in your life, you in your book, you mentioned actually that one of the steps, because you were very lucky to gain a place at Oxford,
yes.
But without allies, it's perhaps not enough. It's almost like you need a CV.
Yes.
And actually, fortunately, you made a very good ally with somebody called Winston Churchill.
Okay, absolutely.
So this seems something very skilled. So it's not the Winston Churchill which we all immediately think of. This is Winston Churchill MP.
The grandson of the wartime leader Winston Churchill, who was a member of Parliament. And I think this is a very good illustration. Thank you for picking up on it, because I think it's a very good illustration about what I mean. That the social mobility depends upon having people who can help to open doors for you, help you to understand the way in which you need to act and behave and what you need to learn. So it's not what you know, although that's important, it's who you know. And I was determined, I was at university, I managed through hook or by crook to get to the point where I was working with an MP, another MP, not Winston, as a research assistant. And by then I'd become quite accustomed to this idea of thinking about the importance of building relationships with potential goals allies. And I had it in my mind that I wanted to have a really powerful name on my CV as a referee, because I was coming out of Oxford University. And I had been surrounded at Oxford University by some very polished people. You know, who'd had the benefit of superb upbringing. They were accomplished sports people. They were accomplished public speakers. They were polished in their in day-to-day interactions. They had a poise and a confidence that I would have died for. I didn't have that, so I needed allies. I needed people to give me the confidence to present myself in the jobs market, where I was going to be up against some of these incredible, polished, admirable people. So I wanted a really powerful name, and I thought, one day I did my targeting.
Yes.
That's the first skill I talk about in the book, targeting.
Okay, so that's another skill, targeting.
Finding the right allies. So I took myself to the House of Commons library, and I went through the list of serving MPs, and I made a short list of the most powerful names there, the people who were likely to make the readers of my CV sit up and take notice. And one name stood out above all, and that was Winston Churchill. So I set about cultivating Winston, and that's skill number 2.
Skill number 2, cultivating.
And cultivation...
so after you have found your ally, you need to...
I missed a slight step out called the cover. So once you've got the target, you need to make yourself attractive to that target. And I'm sorry, I want to get away from the great militaristic language here, but I don't think it's possible.
So cover meaning... Because sometimes people say, be yourself, but be the best version of yourself.
Indeed. So we're all Rubik's cubes. Our personalities are all Rubik's cubes, and we can manipulate our personalities to a certain extent to present the right version of ourselves to engage with the target that we're talking to. So cover doesn't have to be manipulative, I don't believe. It doesn't have to be deceit. It has to be.
You can't be a
simply
completely other person, because then you're not true to yourself, and you can't carry it off anyway.
Absolutely.
So if your natural interest is baking, you can't then pretend that you're a builder on a construction site and you know the ins and outs of concrete.
Absolutely.
They're going to see through it.
So in this particular case, and it's worth pursuing, I think, this one example through to its conclusion with Winston. The cover I adopted was somebody who had an interest in what I discovered to be his parliamentary interest. So in Parliament, as you know, different MPs work on different committees, and it's relatively easy to research what their interests are. What do they care about in the world? And I made myself interested in finding out more about what he cared about in the world. Essentially, that was my cover.
Okay, so but that sounds like cultivation at the same time.
And it is the two things come together, because to cultivate, you need to give the target a reason to wish to engage with you.
Right, that's interesting. So what did you give?
Find out a little bit more about them. Well, I found out his areas of particular interest in the world of foreign affairs, as it happened. And outside his office, there used to be a ticker tape Reuters feed. So for your younger viewers, this will mean nothing. But literally,
well, I'm not even that young, but I'm confused. So.
Okay.
You might have to explain.
Literally, because this was pre the dawn of readily available PCs, really pre-digital age. And the news would come in to certain parts of the House of Commons on a machine which literally, it was like a telegram machine. It would type out the news as you... And the ticker tape, I mean really by that, there was a vast bulk of paper underneath the machine which was folded back and in on itself, and running down each side were a series of holes which were used to guide it through.
Yes.
And the machine would then just spit out news from around the world from Reuters.
Right.
So I would make a point. I got an idea.
See the news first.
This sounds a little bit stalky, but
yes, everything
I wanted. Well, I mean, it sounds a bit stalky because I knew this was quite close to this particular machine was the one that Winston, my target, was going to be using. So I would make sure that I was there when I sort of had an idea he'd be coming and going into his office. And I would make a point of looking for news that were connected to his areas of parliamentary interest.
Ah, okay.
And then started to engage him in conversation about those matters of interest. So you see
So you were giving something back, something interesting for him to think about. You were engaging, not just engaging.
I wasn't just asking for something. I was seeking to present myself as somebody that he would gain something from in the conversation.
I understand.
I was trying to be...
So that's the cultivation. What would come after that?
If we were to go through the whole process, I go on to talk about elicitation and motivation and recruitment, and the particular ways of doing all of these processes. But let's think about elicitation. So
yes, we have unfortunately. It is only one conversation today, so perhaps we can sort of like talk about this, that we're going to be able to understand it in this session.
In a broader sense.
Yes,
so I'll try and relate it to what I was doing with Winston Churchill. So elicitation is really, it's the art of asking questions without asking questions.
Or indeed, if you have another example as well that you'd like to share with us that would be interesting.
You'll have to prompt me on that one. Which one are you
okay.
Which one are you thinking about? Is that when I was in South Sudan, or is it?
Well, let me think. There are quite a few examples in the book, and there was one about. For example, there was a police lady as well who was bored with her job.
Yes.
And she wanted to,
so that was more about motivation.
So that's motivation.
I'll come on to that. Let me just very quickly finish on the Winston story.
Let's do
because
we need to
what I was
happened.
looking for was to get him to take me on as a researcher or a speechwriter.
Yes.
And in the end, because I presented myself in a way that was attractive to him, spent time building a relationship with him. which was not, I wasn't asking for anything at the outset. I was trying to understand better his needs, and soon became clear that he needed a speechwriter. So I presented myself as a speechwriter, and he took me on. Now, it turns out that I wasn't that good as a speechwriter back in those days, but we'll gloss over that. The upshot was, though, that I ended up working for him, and he agreed to be a referee. And many years later, well, not that many years later, when I got my first job in a stockbroker's, where I literally would not have thought I had a snowball in an oven's chance of surviving, I thrived. But the first thing to do was to get the job there. And it was full of people from very, very different backgrounds to mine. And again, these polished products I was talking about, people from fee-paying schools and so on. But I got the job, and then a while later, I was talking to my boss about why he'd chosen me, and he jokingly said, well, I had to take you on because I wanted to phone the House of Commons and ask to speak to Winston Churchill. I hope it was a joke. Which is a fantastic phrase to say on the phone. Hello, is Winston Churchill there, please? Exactly. Who doesn't want to say that? Who doesn't want to ask for him?
What
I'd done, well, actually, if you think about it, was, I think, quite morally and quite correct, without abandoning any principles, because I was providing something that Winston needed as well. I quite morally presented myself in a way that then was of interest to the person who I was putting myself in front of to go for a job. So this is, but I was doing that through alliances.
And once you've cultivated that, there is another step of keeping that going, because there was an incident. There was an incident in the book where you said you were a student working in a local
in a
pub.
bar.
Yes, and so, you met up with a businessman who was a great ally, was happy to be an ally, and you gave each other something. So, for example, he was talking about his business, but you were also giving him conversation when you used to work in the White Swan.
He needed,
but you forgot something very important at the end.
The first thing to say about the bar where I was working, and by the way, I still think that everybody must at some point do service work of that nature. It's really,
we could
really
work in a
important.
cafe.
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be a bar, but it's just a way, somewhere where there's pressure on
people,
to work with people. Because from that position, you get to see the way people are. Because let's go back to it. We all present different parts of ourselves to different people. And interestingly, we tend to reveal a lot more about ourselves to service personnel than we intend to.
Right. Okay. Is this why people, even when you go to the hairdresser,
the hairdressers are brilliant at elicitation. Exactly. Yes. And
so elicitation, tell us about that.
If I had to, sorry, just as a by the by, if I had to go into a new country and recruit a series of informers, I would go for a hairdresser and a taxi driver and somebody who worked in a bar.
Because you would naturally talk to them in everyday life.
And people don't think they're listening.
The nail salon.
They don't think they're, exactly, all of that. If you think about the number of conversations that take place in taxis, where the assumption is that the taxi driver either isn't interested or doesn't have the ability to understand what's going on.
Well, they tell you a lot, because when I went on holiday to Northern Ireland, it was recently, I wanted to know how things had changed, and the taxi driver was telling me everything.
Absolutely. First thing to do.
And I understood the whole, what I thought was, the whole situation that I needed to know to sort of like have a good holiday and avoid all the trouble spots.
Absolutely. First thing to do on arrival in any country where you perhaps are feeling insecure, unsettled, otherwise challenged, is get in a taxi and talk to the taxi driver. Learn a few phrases in the local language to exchange with them. That's a great way of breaking the ice. But talk to the taxi driver, because they will tell you what's what and where to go and what to do. And I have a place down in South Africa, and the person who I first engaged with, really, when I was thinking about buying there, is the guy who works on the security desk, and he's turned out to be a fantastic ally who lets me, I learn all sorts of local intelligence from him. But every time I turn up, it's like, what's been going on? What's happening on this block? What's happening on that block? What do I have to be concerned about?
As you said, somebody going on holiday and wanting to know what trouble spots to avoid, and where you can go to, for example, even just
absolutely, and all of that
go to the best beach. That's still information.
All of that's intelligence,
and that's intelligence.
Tactical as it is still intelligence. And and what you're doing is
where are the best restaurants? Where can I get the best cup of tea?
Yeah. But I'll tell you a story about how people tend to underestimate those people that they see as, horrible word, inferior. I was in a West African country, and I was with somebody who had a background as an intelligence officer. We were working in the private sector at this point. He was resentful that I'd been asked by the client to work on the same job, and he put me in the back seat of the car where he was driving around to talk to sources. And he sat me next to Samira, who was the translator. And he clearly had, in his mind, dismissed Samira as somebody who was of any significance, any importance. She was just there to translate. And because I was sat in the back of the car with her, I got to know her and learned about her background, how she'd lost her father, as it happened, who'd been a quite significant politician in the country. He had been disappeared. And we were able to talk to one another about loss and the pain of loss, and to remember what I said about bringing the pain with you rather than trying to get beyond it. And we became good friends in a relatively short space. And I was able to advise her daughter on applying for positions at the university in the UK. So I was offering something. And we were after a particular piece of intelligence in this job. And the person who knew exactly what we needed was Samira, and she was sat next to us. She was sat in the car. And eventually, after I got to know her, and I asked, what do you think we should be doing to get the answer to this question? And she said, well, I know, because I was the translator where the thing that you're interested in actually happened.
Everybody overlooked.
Absolutely.
Who nobody was actually listening to other than the words that she was translating, and forgot that actually she knew a lot about the situation, the country that she was in, she was and the different dynamics between the people she was translating for.
Absolutely. Overlooked, I think, in part because of her lowly status, although actually I have a huge respect for translators. I mean, it's such an incredible
skill. So never underestimate people.
But for my colleague there, he underestimated her.
Yes.
And there's an important pronoun there, isn't there, as well? It was a her. So she was underestimated because in that particular society, there's
because
a tendency
she was
to
a woman,
dismiss.
And people thought, okay, she's just a translator. What does she know? But actually, she helped you very much.
Incredibly perceptive, knowledgeable, politically aware.
And I guess this translates to everyday life, where people who we don't expect could help us and be allies or inform us. For example, there's a great job going.
Yeah, absolutely.
That could be, I mean, the amount of times I've been sitting drinking chai in a cafe and someone has said, oh, Catherine, you were looking for a nursery for your granddaughter. I'll explain where that could be. And you underestimated them because you thought they were just either just sitting there wasting their time, or perhaps sometimes it's someone serving you the coffee or the tea, and you think, what would they know about nurseries or whatever? And actually they do know, because they have a granddaughter or son, and the
examples
you find
of this,
out so much information.
Absolutely right. The examples of this are many and varied, and so
I mean, there's obviously a lot of these experiences and steps in your book, but sort of more round it up. I mean, we just wondered if there were any other important skills that you think aren't necessary that you have written about in your book, Think Like a Spy, and what happens sort of towards the end. Really.
Let me round it up. So I talk about 9 skills in total. I call them skills. They're actually personality traits that are inherent in all of us, really. Or capabilities that are inherent in all of us. But we're taught in society, we're taught that certain people have a right to certain skills, and they will go on to become business people, CEOs. Certain people will go on to become politicians, mandarins in the civil service. other people have a station in life down here, and they needn't think about developing these skills. And I think that's awful. I think that's the worst thing that we do. And I said, the whole point of the book is to democratize a skill set which belongs to all of us.
Right.
There is no monopoly, and it's accessible to all of us because we are all human.
Right.
And this is the set of skills is about your relationship with yourself. And I talk about self-awareness. So your ability to present the best version of yourself, cover, the ability to interact with somebody by finding the element in yourself that is attractive to them. That's self-awareness, and that's cultivation. Then there's a set of skills which are about others' awareness, and that's elicitation. So learning to listen properly. And it's amazing how we don't so often.
And that's ironic, because actually you did mention elicitation.
And you interrupted me.
I did.
You're quiet, but that's okay because you're human, and
for me
and
to
we all
listen
do.
and for you to talk more about that little bit and to round it up with what comes after elicitation.
So elicitation really in the spy context, and I think it relates also in the building of a relationship with a goals ally, elicitation is there to understand motivation. Elicitation is essentially getting people to talk about themselves. So when you mentioned me working at the White Swan, also known as the Dirty Duck, which is one of my early introductions to one thing having more than one presentation in the world. The person I was talking to there, there's no doubt about it. He was probably somewhat narcissistic. He wanted people to take notice of him.
I was going to ask about this. Now I know I'm interrupting again, but this is actually a very important point, because so far we have talked about people who seem to have rather lovely personalities and approachable people. But you don't always get people like that. You do get toxic people coming into your life who you may have to deal with, and you may need something from them to help you. And indeed, should we use those people to help us? Should we avoid those people? What if we do? We can't avoid those people. They're the only person in a situation that can give light to a piece of information that we need, or to help us to go somewhere.
First of all, fantastic questions. And wow, we could have a whole separate episode on this.
We could talk so much more, couldn't we?
I'd be delighted to come back.
You'd be very welcome.
I don't believe people are all bad. It's Sirius Black in the Harry Potter movies or Harry Potter books. Certainly in the movie, Sirius Black says we all have light and dark within us. It's how you choose to use those that makes you who you are. And I think that's right. So actually, I don't believe that people are all bad. And I've been through my own experiences of presenting in the world a very hard attitude, because I was protecting myself. It was a defense mechanism, and it lost me friends. It lost me girlfriends. And I had to learn to work with that element of myself.
You did actually annoy some of your friends who said at one point you weren't very nice.
I don't think I was. I really don't think I was. I picked up what Mayer had told me about building allies, but I'd become too targeted about it. And I started to dismiss people I didn't think were useful. And that's a really
because of trauma you had been through.
I think so.
And it took a good friend to tell you.
It took somebody I was trying to go out with. So
somebody you were attracted to.
Absolutely.
To say your attitude needs to change.
Yeah. She said, you come across
so you can say, so as you were saying, there's that you're not an inherently bad person, but that was a side of you that other people noticed that you didn't wish you had, and you were willing to make a change.
Absolutely.
And sometimes though you do meet people who don't change,
or
and they are difficult to work with. How do you deal with that?
They're resistant to change. I would say that I'm a great believer in the therapist phrase that hurt people. If I'm presented with somebody who is, this is just my way of dealing with it. If I'm presented with somebody who is abrasive, unpleasant, demanding, narcissistic, the first thing I ask myself is what's hurt them? What's causing that? Because it doesn't come from nowhere. Now, I have had examples where I've walked away from relationships or friendships because somebody is, I'm afraid, irredeemable. But I believe that you have to give people a chance. sometimes maybe one too many chances. So it's important to know when to step back as well, because giving the wrong person too many chances can be injurious to yourself. So self-awareness and others' awareness. But generally...
Are those called interpersonal skills?
That's all that it's about, isn't it? Everything. I mean, we could actually just shorten this whole discussion and just say all we need to do is stop relying on what's on screens in front of us and get back to this.
Yes, we need to develop our interpersonal skills. But does this take a lot of confidence? Because some people aren't that confident. I mean, I see that with all your experiences, you have developed a great confidence, which has clearly helped you. No. So you don't think confidence is the key?
I am terribly introverted. And if you put me into a room full of people that I don't know, my instinct is to turn and run. I don't like big parties. I don't like noisy environments. All of that. So I'm much more likely to be the person found talking to one person or two people throughout the whole night at a party in the kitchen.
And that would be if you go. So is it a case of your favourite party trick is not going?
If I can possibly avoid it, quite often. but if there's if somebody I think either needs my help or we can benefit from spending time together, and I know they will be there, then I will seek them out. Right. And I think actually, introversion sometimes can be very, very helpful in the sense that it does mean that you are able to engage with people in a much more meaningful way. Oftentimes, the extrovert, that person who's always looking over the shoulder of the person they're talking to so that they can find somebody else to show how wonderful they are too, doesn't really make much of a difference in people's lives. So
they miss out on so much.
And they miss out on a great deal by not investigating and building alliances. So I think, I mean, that's not to say they can't do all of these things too. It's just actually... I've got good news for people who feel that they're shy. I've got good news for people who feel that they are introverted. You're stronger. In this case, beta beats alpha because people care more.
That's interesting.
And they engage
with you. Beta beats alpha. Okay.
Because you can engage, and you can engage meaningfully. Right. In the end, this
because
is all about...
Because you're taking almost a step back.
And you're caring about other people. An introvert is much more likely to ask about somebody else. How are you? What are you doing? How do you feel? What can I do to help you? And that way you build a proper mutually trusting alliance or friendship or relationship.
So all of these skills are not necessarily just for the extrovert. They are for everybody, including those who would call themselves introvert.
Yes.
Who wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable meeting so many people. And as you said, sometimes it's not numbers. It's the quality.
It's the targeting, perhaps. And you can think about this. You can turn it to so many different ends. If it's professional, you can be very specific about your targeting. Let's face it, something like LinkedIn is essentially a system of targeting. It's not a very efficient one because you end up with lots and lots of connections and lots. To my mind, I always say this. Somebody said to me the other day, what's the difference at a book festival? I was in Guernsey last week, and they said, what's the difference between networking and targeting? And I said,
that's what I was going to mention because we all have social media.
And I said, networking is a waste of time.
Right, so it's not the same at all.
I don't think it's anything close to being the same. And certainly building unless you're an influencer, and I can see that if you're an influencer and you have a commercial value in having a great many followers, that's a commercial model.
Right.
That's not about relationships at all. We know that. That's about audience numbers. But for the vast majority of us who are not influencers, the world of social media has pulled a really unpleasant trick on us. And I hold certain figures responsible, but let's not get into this. It's made people believe that there is value in a number. I have
so many
X thousand followers. So what?
Right.
How many friends do you have? How many allies do you have? How many people in your life that you can turn to? Because are
they connecting with you? Will they answer your messages on social media?
Absolutely. Because when something bad happens, as it always does in everybody's life, yes, you might get lots of people on social media saying, giving you likes, and you end up with that absurd thing where somebody will say that they've lost a member of their family and it gets likes and the little clap emojis and nonsense like that. And that should illustrate one thing. It's not connecting.
No.
So my view is networking in that sense, certainly the digital networking, but also to a lesser extent face-to-face networking. And I know some very good networkers have very, very wide groups of people that they can engage with, but they're not using that to any effective end.
Yes.
And that's where the targeting comes in. So networking can be a useful adjunct to, but to targeting. But in itself,
not honing itself
it's a waste of time.
What you really want, yes,
yeah.
because
I truly believe that. It's like, it's like the person being popular, I'm sorry to say, it's just a waste of time.
Right. And it takes a lot of energy, to be honest.
It takes a lot of energy. But being a good friend, a good ally, and somebody who is understands that alliances are two-way streets.
Absolutely.
That's valuable.
Where is home for you, Julian? Because you have lived in many different places. You have lived in South London, the Welsh borders. You have travelled extensively. But we know you grew up in Birmingham. Where do you call home? And for you, what does home really mean?
That's a brilliant question, one that's so difficult to answer. I'll give a couple of potential answers. And
in a nutshell, because
we're running out of time.
Well, we're running out of time. We've had a wonderful conversation, and we would love to talk to you more. But I just think that would perfectly round up our wonderful conversation that we've had today.
Very quickly, then, I've realised recently that home for me, at a very visceral emotional level, because I've recently had to spend a lot of time in Birmingham seeing my brother as he goes through his medical battle. I've realised that
all pray for him as well. May Allah help him.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, and I'm happy to say, as of the last time I saw him, he's making tremendous strides forward. So let's hope that continues, inshallah.
Yes, inshallah.
I realised that Birmingham is home, essentially. It's where I'm in tune with the accent, although I realise I've probably lost mine.
But I get that too, because I don't have a Birmingham accent, but I love the Birmingham accent.
And it soon comes back.
It does, doesn't it?
I can do it with the best of us, to be honest, mate.
Yeah.
And it's really, and I love it. It makes you feel at home. It makes you feel so. It's there. I felt instantly at home. But there's also just another little bit of this as well. The first time I ever went to Africa was on holiday in my 20s, and it happened to be Zimbabwe. And I got off the plane and we walked onto the tarmac, and there was something about the smell, something about the energy, something about the heat, about landing in Africa that made me feel. And I verbalised it internally. Oh, I've come home. I felt like I'd arrived home. And from that day onwards, Africa has been, to one degree or another, a really important part of my life. And I still have that feeling more or less wherever I land in Africa. And that's interesting, isn't it? Because Africa is meant to be the cradle of humanity.
Absolutely. So we come from Africa. Our ancestors come from Africa.
We're all refugees from Africa, ultimately. But what that really says to me, most importantly,
which goes in line with Islam, by the way. Wonderful. The first people were from Africa.
Indeed. So what that also says to me, if I can, and I don't want to sound cliched, I don't want to sound pat, but I think home for me is humanity. Home is wherever you are with people who care, and where you can form meaningful alliances and relationships.
That's amazing. That is absolutely wonderful. I have learnt so much today, Julian. Thank you so much for sharing all your stories, talking to us about your book, Think Like a Spy, and for enlightening us to know that we have so many skills we're just perhaps not utilising.
Get out there and use them. To all young people, I say, just get out. Just get out. Go and talk to people. But thank you for giving me the opportunity today, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Julian Fisher.
Thank you.